Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to JDB Selects. Sorry there was no video last week. I'm certainly running on fumes as we get towards the tail end of the season, and it seems that some players are too. So thanks for sticking with me. Hopefully we can keep strong for the next 3 weeks. Still some really important games to be played to decide the makeup of not only the top 4 but the top 8. So plenty to look forward to as footy fans. So let's just get stuck into my tips and predictions for round 25. But before we get into the video, I'd like to give a massive shout out to Spinbet. They obviously help make these videos happen, so big love to them. They have given a really awesome bonus code for new customers this week. All you need to do is redeem the code JDB bonus code, deposit $20, you will get $50 in bonus bets and 100 free spins. Now, just very important that you do those things in that order. Redeem the code, deposit $20, get your $50 in bonus bets, and then once you've used your $50 of bonus bets, you will get those 100 free spins. The link to join Spinbet is in my bio. It is really important that you do go through that link as well. So I appreciate you guys if you do check them out. And once again, thank you to Spinbet. Alright, now let's talk footy. So last week we tipped 6 out of 8 games. I really thought we may have got the perfect week last week. The Storm obviously got past the Panthers at Bluebet thanks to some very ordinary officiating. I did tip the Tigers to beat the Rabbitohs, which was, I thought, a genius tip, only for the Titans to let me down on Sunday. In hindsight, that Titans tip was awful, but I really did think they would give it a shake for Foz's 300th. Still running at 60% for the season. I think we're going to be resound to the fact that that's where we're going to land this year, but hopefully between now and then we can pull off the elusive perfect week. And speaking of perfect weeks, we do have Manawatu Turbo back atop the ladder after 24 rounds thanks to his own perfect week last week. He has leapfrogged Cornish Hua to take that top spot back, which I think he's had for a few weeks now. Congrats Manawatu Turbo. Congrats to everyone on that screen in the top 20. Great seasons. Still a few more rounds, potentially another lead change, who knows. But congrats again and good luck with your tips this week. Let's get stuck into my tips and predictions for round 25. Alright, round 25 gets underway on Thursday night with the last placed West Tigers taking on the 6th placed Manly Sea Eagles at Leichhardt Oval. Alright, starting first with the Tigers, they notched up their 5th win of the season, surviving a late surge by the South Sydney Rabbitohs to hang on to win by 2 points, 18 points to 16. It certainly was one of the more disciplined performances from Benji's men. They managed to complete at 87% for the entire match and actually played with the full 13 men for the full 80. Lockie Garvin was once again impressive. I mean, some of those balls he shot out left, things of beauty. And he really complemented the experience of Aiden Caesar. But for me, it was, a real complete team performance with West seemingly running harder and showing far more desire down the stretch and were deserved winners. Now, in terms of teams list for the Tigers this week, Whenua Pole is under a injury cloud with a knee injury, while Stafford Toa is also unsure when he'll return from a hamstring niggle. Aside from that, I would expect the same 17 to be rolled out. And as for Manly, the Sea Eagles charged towards their first finals berth since 2021, beating the Warriors at home 24 points to 10. Despite the scoreline, Manly weren't quite as dominant as it suggests, but they were able to absorb almost all of the Warriors' attack and managed to convert their attacking chances into points of their own. DCE was once again outstanding, producing a 40-20, 3 line break assists, and he played to the torrential conditions perfectly, as did Tommy Turbo, who ran for over 200 metres with 2 try assists and a try of his own. Now, in terms of teams list for the Sea Eagles, Tommy Talau and Gordon Chankom Tong both could be in doubt this week after picking up minor injuries against the Warriors. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, Manly, they have won 7 of the last 8 games. That includes 6 straight. The Tigers, though, however, have a near-perfect record against the Sea Eagles at Leichhardt, winning 7 of the 9 games played at the 8th wonder of the world. The live odds, thanks of course to our friends at Spinbet. You can check them out by scanning that QR code. Have the Sea Eagles at $1.22 favourites, with the Tigers coming back at $4.20. The points line is currently 14.5. Fairly straightforward one for me. I think the Tigers, although they won last week, it was very scrappy against a very ordinary South Sydney side. And Manly certainly, when they're, hit their straps, they're a very tough side to control and contain. So I do think Manly win and win well. So I am going to take Manly 13+. Alright, moving now to the first of 2 games on Friday this week, starting first with the 14th placed NZ Warriors, taking on the 5th placed Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs at Go Media Stadium over here in Aotearoa, Auckland. Alright, starting first with the Warriors, their 2024 campaign is officially over. No more mathematical chances after dishing up a poor showing and second half against the Manly Sea Eagles, 24 points to 10. For what must be the 1,000 millionth week in a row, the Warriors had all the field position and possession early, but couldn't convert it into points, with their attack once again looking slow, laboured and predictable. Poor old SJ had a really disappointing showing in his first game back since announcing his retirement at the end of the season, and poor old Luke Metcalf also looked like a player that hadn't played since round 4. The season was a very stark reminder for us Warriors fans that there are no shortcuts in the NRL, and sticking with underperforming players really pays off. Now, in terms of teams list for this week, Wade Egan, he was left out late last week, but should be good to go this week. Jackson Ford, he is also listed to be available for selection if required. And as for the Dogs, they pushed their case for a spot in the top 4, finishing fast to take down the Dolphins in Bundaberg, 30 points to 10. The Dogs were really physical and methodically wore down the Finns, camping themselves in the Finns' half for what felt like the entire second half and didn't concede a single second half point either. Jacob Carraz, Connor Tracy and Bronson Cherry were huge once again, and Matt Burden had one of his better games of the season, both running the ball and off the boot. The Dogs, they're really on a tear right now and look to be a tough matchup for anyone on their day, but as the saying goes, every dog has their day. Now, in terms of teams list for Canterbury this week, Josh Curran picked up a very painful looking shoulder injury, but I doubt he'll want to miss the game against his old club. Outside of that, I would expect the same 17 for the Bulldogs this week. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Warriors, they have won 6 of the last 7 games against the Dogs, with the Doggies snapping a 6-game skid earlier this season. Canterbury, they have only won 1 game at Go Media Stadium since 2012, with the Kiwis winning 5 straight. The live odds, thanks to Spinbet, currently have the Dogs at $1.45 favourites, with the Warriors bouncing back at $2.75. The points line is currently 7.5 points. Alright guys, this is pure bias, pure will for SJ to go out on top at Mount Smart one more time. So I am going to take the Warriors here by 1 to 12 points. I think the boys need to get up for this game. If they can't get up for SJ's last game at Go Media at Mount Smart, then, you know, just throw the whole team out and get a new one. I know the Dogs have been phenomenal this season, but I'm going to just hope that I get to witness SJ walk off Mount Smart as a winner one more time. So I'm taking the Wars, 1 to 12. Alright, and the final game on Friday night has the 10th place Broncos taking on the 16th placed Parramatta Eels at Suncorp Stadium. Alright, starting first with Brisbane, they had their final bye of the season last week, but the week prior took down the North Queensland Cowboys in Townsville, 42 points to 18. The Broncos scored first, but quickly found themselves behind, and the game was on the knife's edge still at halftime. That was until Katoni Staggs came out like a man possessed, bagging a try-double through sheer determination, which I think really inspired the Broncos and set the tone for what was the second half demolition. Corey Jensen and Paddy Carrigan were also incredibly important, and both perfectly filled the gap left by Payne Haas seamlessly. Every game now is do or die for the Broncos, but with some key personnel missing, can they do the unthinkable? So speaking of that, Reece Walsh and Payne Haas won't be available this week, but are both hopeful to return in time for the finals if the Broncos can make it through into September. Obviously, Ezra Mam is also currently out with injury, so 3 of their biggest stars currently unavailable. And as for the Eels should have been right at home underwater at Allianz Stadium, but instead were barely troubled by the Roosters, 38 points to 14. Outside of a couple of late tries, Parramatta's attack was really poor, with Brown and Arcee in the halves unable to fire a shot. Poor old Dylan Brown, he seems really lost without a dominant number 7 beside him, and he certainly tries very, very hard, but I thought that was very, very evident against the Chooks. Their middles lacked go forward and struggled to make metres and contain Brandon Smith around the ruck, which is something they've struggled with all season. In terms of teams list, for Para, I don't think there was any new injuries, so we'll likely only see performance-based changes. Alright, looking at the two sides head-to-head, Brisbane, they have won 4 of the last 5 games overall. However, the Eels, they have come out on top in their last 3 games at Suncorp. The live odds in this one currently have the Broncos at $1.36 favourites, with the Eels coming back at $3.10. The points line is currently 8.5. Man, I have flipped and flopped all day on who I'm going to tip here. Alright, moving now to the first game on Saturday, starting first with the 12th placed Canberra Raiders hosting the 2nd placed Penrith Panthers at GIO Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Raiders, they were embarrassed by the Cowboys in Townsville, 44 points to 4. Canberra missed plenty of tackles and made far too many unforced errors inside their own end, which gifted the Cowboys territory or let them off the hook. The Milks forward pack was where I thought they'd have a massive advantage against the Cowboys, but they barely made a dent, with Hudson Young the only player to make more than 100 run meters, with both Tapani and Papali'i combining for just 130. The Raiders have dished up some really ordinary and tired performances recently, and are a major chance of missing out on finals football in 2024. Now, in terms of teams list for this week, Jordan Rapana, he should be named to play as long as he's overcome his concussion protocols and symptoms. Outside of that, it should be the same side for the Raiders. And as for the Panthers, they were dealt a cruel blow at the hands of the Melbourne Storm, both on the field and the scoreboard, going down 24 points to 22. Penrith were far from their clinical best right from the opening whistle, with even Nathan Cleary missing an easy conversion, which ultimately proved costly. I certainly think the Panthers were a touch hard done by with some of those referee calls, but it certainly did go both ways, with some proving more costly than others, but ultimately losing Nathan Cleary with 15 minutes to go and the game on the line really shifted the momentum in the favour of the Storm. Now, in terms of the teams list for the Panthers this week, Liam Martin, he returns from suspension, so he'll be slotted right back into the starting side. Nathan Cleary, though, he won't require surgery on his shoulder, but it is eyeing a return during the finals, with no current ETA just yet. Now, looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Panthers, they have won 10 of the last 13 games overall. They've also won 4 straight games at GIO Stadium, with the Raiders' last win against the Panthers coming back in 2016. Look, I think this one's pretty straightforward. The Raiders may surprise a few people. They need to show something, but I do think the Panthers will be too strong. Even without Nathan Cleary, they have proved time and time again that they are a well-oiled machine, and their next-up mentality is really second to none. So I do think the Raiders give them a bit of a shake, but I think the Panthers ultimately come out on top by 1 to 12 points. Alright, moving now to the second game on Saturday, we have the first place Melbourne Storm taking on the 9th place Dolphins at Amy Park. Alright, starting first with the Storm, they have one hand firmly on the minor premiership after beating the Panthers in Penrith 24 points to 22. As I just mentioned when I talked on the Panthers' performance, I thought the refereeing was extremely ordinary on both sides, and it certainly took away from what could have been a cracking game. Tyron Wishart, though, he was absolutely unbelievable, and in my opinion almost single-handedly turned that game in Melbourne's favour when he was injected into the contest, scoring that crucial try and just bringing some much-needed spark. Now, in terms of teams list for the Storm this week, both Xavier Coates and Christian Welsh are a chance of returning. And as for the Dolphins, they are now dangerously close to falling out of title contention for the second straight year after getting torched by the Bulldogs 30 points to 10. I thought a majority of that game the Finns showed, really incredible effort, none more so than when the Hammer chased down the Fox to save what looked to be a certain try. And I also thought that they showed pretty solid defence, and they were camped in their own end for a majority of that second half before fatigue finally set in and they couldn't hold on any longer. I thought both Herbie Farnworth and Jake Averillo were great in the centres again, but the Dolphins, they sort of lack a bit of punch through the middle lately, and again, it's to be expected. They've got quite a few players out. The likes of Tom Gilbert's been missing since very early on the season, but that's certainly starting to, come to the front as we get to the pointy end of the season. Now, in terms of teams list for the Finns, Mark Nichols, he should be cleared to play from his concussion protocols this week. And huge news too for the Finns and their fans is that Jeremy Marshall-King is listed to return either this week or next, but hopefully it's not too little too late for the Finns. Looking at the two sides head to head, this is only the third time they've met, and the Finns are yet to beat the Storm. The live odds currently have the Melbourne Storm at $1.19 favourites, with the Finns bouncing back at $4.60. The points line is the second largest of the week at 14.5. Fairly straightforward one for me. I do think the Storm win. I'd like to think that the Dolphins can keep it close or would show a ton of that sort of fight that they have shown in recent weeks. But ultimately the Storm will come out on top by 1 to 12 points. Alright, and the final game on Saturday has the 15th placed South Sydney Rabbitohs taking on the 11th placed Newcastle Knights at Accor Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Rabbitohs, they almost pulled victory from the jaws of defeat against the Tigers in the 80th minute, coming up just short 18 points to 16. It certainly wasn't the greatest quality contest from both sides, which wasn't much of a surprise given their position on the ladder. However, I thought the Rabbitohs looked really tired and lacked the same amount of effort and intensity as the Tigers. In terms of teams list for the Bunnies this week, Cody Walker, he was seriously concussed towards the end of that game, so I doubt he'll be available potentially this week and maybe even next. Walker is currently the 11th South Sydney player listed as unavailable this week, which is over 30% of their roster. So when you think about it, the poor Bunnies have had to deal with a significant amount of injuries to key personnel, but certainly, there's certainly other things at fault too. And as for the poor old Knights, they almost pulled off a massive upset against the Cronulla Sharks, coming up short in Golden Point, 19 points to 18. It really was a mixed bag performance from the Newcastle Knights, completely missing the jump in the opening quarter before working their way back into the contest and then making a million errors in a row with the game on the line. I thought Kalen Ponga did his best, but again kind of went missing in stages, which is to be expected too when a side is so reliant on one player. And then they obviously struggled in the halves too. That's certainly been their Achilles heel all year. I think they are still the side with the least amount of points scored this season, which really goes to show that they have struggled in that department, and their pain only gets worse this week with Tyson Gamble breaking his hand against the Sharks. So I assume that would likely mean that Jackson Hastings and Jack Cogger will steer the side around this week. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Rabbitohs have only lost to the Knights once at Accor Stadium in the entirety of their rivalry. They've also won 12 of the last 15 games against the Knights. The live odds, thanks to our friends at Spinbet, currently have the Knights at $1.62 favourites, with the Bunnies bouncing back at $2.30. The points line is currently 3.5 points. Another really interesting game here. I do think the Knights are a bit unlucky against the Sharks. They certainly maybe didn't deserve the win, but were certainly in stages the better side. And the poor old Bunnies, like I touched on, just have so many injuries and so many players out that they're almost fielding a second string side. But for me, I think the Knights can make a bit of history, snap a bit of that skid they've been on against the Rabbitohs. They've got probably more to play for at this point of the season than the Rabbitohs. So for me, Newcastle get them 1-12. Alright, moving now to the first of two games on Sunday, starting first with the 13th placed Gold Coast Titans taking on the 3rd placed Sydney Roosters at Cbus Super Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Titans, they couldn't give Kieran Foran a win in his 300th game, getting blown away, literally, against the Dragons in that opening half, 32 points to 16. Despite scoring the opening try in the opening minute, it was all St George for the remaining 39 of the first half, with conditions playing a massive part. Gold Coast were much improved in the second half with the wind at their back, but they really lacked polish on attack, unable to trouble the Dragons' line even with a one-man advantage. The standout once again was Keanu Kenny, who ran for almost 350 metres with a try assist and 4 tackle breaks, but he desperately needed someone to go with him. Now, in terms of teams list for the Titans this week, Beau Fermor, Harley Smith-Shields and Mo Fotuaika are all likely to be included this week. And as for the Roosters, they managed to tread water at the Great Lake of Australia that is Allianz Stadium and comprehensively defeated the Eels 38 points to 14. Brandon Smith was unbelievable for the Roosters, scheming around the ruck, and although his stats certainly don't show it, I thought it was one of his better games of the season, if not as a Rooster overall. The back five for the Roosters were great too and found plenty of success on the edges, with James Tedesco continuing to prove his doubters wrong, and given the conditions it was pretty impressive what they were able to achieve. They are now certainly, in my opinion, and it is just my humble opinion, one of, if not the team to beat, with the Panthers' wheels starting to wobble a bit with the injury to Nathan Cleary. Now, in terms of team list for the Chooks this week, big news is Jared Warrior-Hargreaves has served his suspension, so will be back in the side. Michael Jennings, Nat Butcher and Connor Watson are also potential ins. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Roosters have won 10 straight games against the Titans and have only lost to the Gold Coast once since 2014. The live odds, thanks to our friends at Spinbet, which you can check out by scanning that QR code or hitting the link in the video description, have the Roosters at $1.17 favourites, with the Titans bouncing back at a very large $5 flat. The points line is the largest of the week at 15.5. Pretty straightforward one, Roosters 13+. Alright, and the final game of round 25 has the 8th place Dragons taking on the 4th place Cronulla Sharks at WIN Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Dragons are one step closer to playing finals football after beating the Gold Coast Titans in Wollongong 32 points to 16. Despite conceding the opening try in the first minute, it was all the Dragons from that point onwards, with Ben Hunt, Zach Lomax, Tyrell Sloan, and Jack de Belin having standout games. Despite showing plenty of attacking offense in that first 40, the most impressive part for me was the Dragons' defense in that second half, especially when they were down a man. The Titans were camped on their line, or in their half basically, for the entire second stint, and the Dragons only conceded a few second half points, which I think is very, very impressive, and certainly sets them in good stead for the finals. Now, in terms of teams list for the Dragons this week, I don't believe they picked up any new injuries. For Amanu Brown, he should return from a hamstring injury this week. Hame Sally is obviously still out with that chest injury, and Kyle Flanagan won't return to the side until first week of the finals if they are to make it. And as for the Sharks, they barely managed to scrape past the Knights at home, squeaking out a golden point win, 19 points to 18. The Sharks, they started really fast and they flew out to a 12-point lead after just 10 minutes, but then really struggled to go on with it. I think they lacked a little bit in the halves, obviously with Blake Brayley and Daniel Atkinson filling in due to the injuries to Braden Trindle and Nico Hines. I thought the Sharks' middles and edge players were really, really strong. Siva Talakai ran for over 200 metres, Oregon Kafusi 160, and Jesse Ramian for 226. But they really just lacked that killer instinct. They had so many chances down the stretch, with Newcastle just coughing the ball over set after set, but they just couldn't find that pass. There was no organisation. They felt rushed, and again, I think that was down to the lack of experience in the halves. And that may all change this week as Braden Trindle is listed to return. That doesn't obviously mean he will return, but if he can return, I think the Sharks will certainly get a lot more direction. Alright, looking at the two sides head to head, the Dragons have won 6 of the 8 games played at Wynn Stadium versus Cronulla. However, the Sharks, they have won 10 of the last 11 meetings overall since 2019. The live odds, thanks to our friends at SpinBet, currently have the Sharks at $1.60 favourites, with the Dragons coming back at $2.35. The points line is currently 3.5 points. I know this is tough because the Sharks were really, really ordinary against the Knights. But I do think that this is, going to be one up front. You've got two very big physical packs. The difference is going to come in the halves. If Trindle is in for Cronulla, I think that's a big in and makes a massive difference. So banking on him being in the side, I am going to take the Sharks here by 1 to 12 points. I think, again, it's going to be a very physical game. And I do think the Sharks can edge it. But, geez, I'm not confident here at all. So, good luck. Alright, just like that, we are done for another week. 2 more weeks to go, guys. Thanks as always for watching. If you are new here, hit the like button. Hit subscribe, join our Discord server, check out our Patreon for next season, and I'll see you in the next one.